So this video was supposed to be simple. I download some computer games, I play them, I tell you how they did, and then I recommend you actually get a proper gaming laptop or gaming desktop, and that's the video. But that's actually not the case. This is a lot more complicated than that. Let me explain. So where do I actually begin? Well, let's take a look at the Surface itself. This is the Microsoft Surface Pro 8 from 2001. This is a pretty big deal of a Surface device. It has the new Intel 11th Gen i7-1185G7. This has Intel's new Xe graphics, which we're going to be talking about in today's video. Additionally, this configuration has 16 gigabytes of RAM, and Microsoft did some nice upgrades to this thing besides just the internals that I've mentioned. First off, we have Thunderbolt, 2 Thunderbolt connections on the side. That's awesome. Of course, there also is the redesign, a larger screen, thinner bezels. It looks a lot more modern, although looking more modern is not going to get you more frames per second. Now, one thing I do want to mention is I've gamed before on Surface devices. In 2019, I had the Surface Pro 6, and I ended up returning it. I didn't buy it just for gaming, but I wanted to see its potentials. And at the time, the Intel integrated graphics, I wasn't too happy with. And there was no Thunderbolt, which means you can't add an eGPU, which might be something we also talk about, but I digress. Because of that video, gaming on the Surface Pro 6, I realized a lot of strengths and weaknesses about the tablet. And I want to start off this video actually comparing some of the games that I tried out in 2019 in now 2022 on this new tablet. And the first game we're going to look at is Team Fortress 2. If you don't play Team Fortress 2, that's fine. Just bear with me for a second. So firing up Team Fortress 2, I had the resolution set to 1920 by 1080. And in 2019 with the Pro 6, I was getting, 40 FPS, give or take, but a lot of stuttering. Now with the Pro 8, I'm getting an average of 80 to 90 frames per second. Don't get me wrong, there is the occasional stuttering that's happening, which is dropping the frames to like 40, give or take, but I am averaging 80 to 90, sometimes going into the low hundreds. That is a very large improvement. And all of our settings are set to high. So this is really good actually. With our first game down, I'm actually feeling really good about this. And our next game, it's gonna be a simple game, bear with me, Minecraft, the Java edition specifically. This has ran on a lot of hardware in the past, so I thought it would be fine. And to what I expected, Minecraft ran perfectly fine, averaging around 80 to 100 frames per second. I did have the render distance set to 18. If I did set it to 32, performance would suffer a little bit, or sometimes quite a bit, to be honest. But at the render distance of 18, I was extremely satisfied. And this now brings us to our last game that I compared back in 2019, and that is Mirror's Edge. I have not played this game in a long time, but just firing it up back in 2019 on the Surface Pro 6, I was getting unplayable frames per second. We're talking low 20s, and it didn't matter what settings I adjusted, it was just not playable. Something had to have been wrong. I'm not sure. Because nowadays, with the Surface Pro 8, I got into the game, I changed all my settings to high, resolution 1920 by 1080, and I was constantly averaging 60 frames a second. That's great. But at the beginning of this video, I said that this video was not that easy. It wasn't gonna just be me playing games and telling you the frames per second. I know, I'm getting there. And that leads us into our next game, CSGO. So I downloaded CSGO from the Steam store, started it up, and what the heck? I was getting freezing up, audio stuttering. It was a nightmare. It was glitching out. It was freezing. I was like, what is going on? What is going on? And I thought that my Surface Pro 8 was fully up to date driver-wise. But after some Googling, I realized that was actually not the case. As 2 weeks ago, Intel came out with a new Intel Xe graphic driver update. So I closed out the game, got the drivers updated, and was back into the game quite shortly. And now the game was running a lot better. Now I say it was performing a lot better, but hold on one second. So when I jumped in, I had the resolution set to 1920 by 1080, and I was at high settings. And I was getting 40 to 50 frames a second. Okay, not too bad. I mean, I'm used to playing CSGO at well over 100, but okay, I'll deal with this. But I was having some stuttering issues. And I also almost felt like my mouse tracking was acting up. I don't know, something was a little wrong. My kill strikes were not doing too well. I'm not really that great, sorry. And when I changed the settings to medium, still at 1920 by 1080, the frame rates didn't actually improve. They were kind of the same. But then I actually realized one of the settings I failed to change was I had multi-sampling anti-aliasing mode turned on. So after I disabled that, I was at 720p medium settings, and that changed it all. Now I was at almost 200 frames per second, mostly averaging about 175. This was what I expected. This was a great experience. So mind you, I was still at 720p, but I did change the medium settings now to high. And after doing that, my frame rate dropped a little bit. We were averaging about 100 to 110 frames a second, but I wasn't really having any stuttering problems or anything like that. It was very playable. I was very happy. So I'm like, all right, let me jump now to 1080p. And the game crashed. So as soon as the game crashed, I called it quits on CSGO for now, and I jumped to our next game, Halo Infinite, which I know is a brand new game. And that's why I was even more curious how well it performs, as I'm sure a lot of you are playing it. I actually haven't played yet, so I really wanted to. So I downloaded it, and yikes, it is not working. Nothing was loading properly. It was freezing. All these textures were not coming in right whatsoever. You know, I'm thinking my computer's broken at that point, but I do jump on Google, check out some forums, and rest assured, Halo Infinite does not play well with the Intel Xe drivers at the moment. That's unfortunate. I didn't spend much time messing around, but I think right this second, Halo Infinite is not going to be running on the Surface Pro 8. Not yet, at least. So let's jump to our next game, which will be GTA 5. So right when I jumped into GTA 5, I had the resolution set to 1600 by 900. All of these settings were set to normal, and I had anti-aliasing turned off. And out of the box with those settings, I was averaging around 40 frames per second. So nothing super amazing, but 40 frames a second, I was pretty happy with that. It was very playable. I was driving around and I felt like I could play the game all day if I wanted to. It was awesome. Now I was wondering how much I could push it. So I did switch the settings to high, still kept anti-aliasing turned off, and my average frames per second then was 27. That is not as ideal. I would rather it be at 40, so I think having normal settings and losing some of that detail is worth it to add extra frames. But even though GTA did not perform amazingly at high settings, it was still perfectly playable at normal settings. And I had no stuttering, I had no issues getting into the game. It worked right out of the box. That's not something I can completely say with our next game, Call of Duty Warzone. So the first time I jumped onto Call of Duty Warzone, it was just a black screen. It was loading in the background, but it was a black screen. I couldn't do anything. The game kind of froze up. So I force quit out of Warzone, jumped back into it, and the first splash screen started up fine. And then I was back to a black screen. And I was like, that's not good. So I closed out of it again, restarted the third time, and hey, I was now at the menu. So now that I was in the menu, I didn't want to mess around with too many settings. So the setting I did play around with very quickly was I adjusted the render resolution. And I actually had it set to its lowest amount, which was 1066 by 710. And once I got into the game, my frame rate counter was not working, but the game felt extremely smooth. Again, I don't know what frames per second I was actually getting with my frame rate counter not working, but I think I was getting around 50 to 60 frames per second. It was very playable, very smooth, even when I was in a heavily populated area with a lot of other players. Sure, the graphics did not look amazing at the very small render resolution, but it was playable. Very playable, in fact. I did try to raise the render resolution a little bit. I set it to 1670 by 1114, and all of a sudden I was already feeling like we were dropping some frames, probably hitting under 30 frames a second. So I just quickly went back to the lower render resolution and kept on playing. So even though this game doesn't look the prettiest with the Intel Xe graphics, and it did take me 3 times to get the game running, once I got it running, it ran flawlessly. I was actually a little surprised. I wasn't sure how it was going to run. So that's actually awesome that it went so well. So at this point, I can kind of just go on and on, taking a look at different games, showing you the frames per second, but that's actually kind of not the point anymore, because the point has already been made that the Surface Pro 8 with the new Intel Xe graphics is an actual capable gaming device. Sure, it is not going to play every game at high resolution, at high quality settings, but it will play some games at high resolution and high quality. All it comes down to is you kind of spending the time messing with your settings. Figure out what is the best resolution and quality for the game you're going to play. That just takes time on your behalf, because everyone is different when it comes to gaming. Some people, pending the game you want to play, will actually sacrifice frames per second just to have better quality. Other people are fine with the quality looking like a potato as long as they have the frames per second. Part of this does come down to a opinion, what you prefer. However, one thing to remember is compatibility. Intel's Xe graphics are still relatively new, and unfortunately, we have seen that not all games actually support the Xe graphics. It was definitely way worse several months ago, and it's better now, but even now, there are still games out there that don't completely work or work at all with the Intel Xe drivers. at the end of the day, we're just waiting on Intel to work on their driver support for games. And don't get me wrong, there is an argument to be made that Intel should be working on this probably harder than they are. And I do agree with that. But at the end of the day, we can't really change much. So when you're looking at a game for a Surface Pro 8, just take a look on some forums, take a look on Google, see if your game supports the XE graphics. And hopefully in a few months from now, this won't really be a problem anymore, but it is a problem right now. Some games just are not working with XE, and it is unfortunate, but hopefully it will be resolved. However, there is something that you can do. If you have a Surface Pro 8 and you are lucky enough to have a spare graphics card, which is pretty hard in today's economy at the moment, but if you do have a graphics card or have the ability to get one, the Surface Pro 8 has Thunderbolt, so you can add an eGPU and essentially bypass the XE graphics and use a proper NVIDIA or AMD card. That is not a bad idea, especially if you're going to use a Surface at a desk when you are gaming. But guys, that is gaming on the Surface Pro 8. Yes, you can do it. Sometimes it works really well. Some games might not always be the fastest or the best, and something like an eGPU would be necessary, but you do have that option. Unfortunately, the biggest issue is actually the XE graphics and the fact that the support is not fully there. But I do think give it time and we will be there. So should you get this over a gaming laptop or a gaming desktop? Of course, the answer is no to that. If you can get a proper gaming laptop or desktop with way higher end specs, that is going to be worth it. That is going to be less hassle and it should work a lot better out of the box. But if you're someone that wants the form factor of a Surface tablet and understands that there are limitations to this hardware is still very capable though. So I don't and I can't recommend this just for gaming, but can it game? Yes, it can. And it's actually, depending on what you're playing, not even the worst experience. So guys, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, let me know in the comments below, or else I will see you in the next one.